Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. It started with the heat. Not some storm, not a siren in the distance or screaming on the streets. Just the kind of New York City summer heat that wraps around your shoulders like wet towels. The kind that makes steel sweat and pigeons lazy. Tuesday, July 18th. Heat index hit 105 degrees by noon. I was already on my third run of the day hauling Thai food from East Village to the Upper West Side on a janky old e-bike with a fried torque sensor. Name's Luis Rivera, 32. Born in Washington Heights, raised in Bushwick, bounced around boroughs since I turned 18. I've done everything kitchens, retail, security at Barclays for one season. But cycling? It's stuck, keeps me moving, keeps the stress out of my head. And when the city runs, it needs wheels even more when it's breaking down. I was pushing down 2nd Avenue when the blackout hit. The first sign was the traffic lights, all green, then flashing, then dead. Same moment, car horns started up like a choir of confused animals. I remember the woman in the Range Rover beside me staring at her dead dashboard like it had betrayed her. Then the subway vents along the sidewalk stopped rumbling. Gone. Silence underfoot. By the time I reached 45th, I already had no signal. ATANT. Dead zone. I thought it was local, a temporary grid failure. NYC gets them in heat waves, especially in older neighborhoods. I once saw Con Ed Cruz pull a smoking junction box out of the sidewalk like it was radioactive. But this was different. The streetlights went dark. The deli on the corner, which always ran 3 refrigerators full of soda and beer, was pitch black inside. I turned the corner toward Bryant Park, and that's when I saw the first signs of panic. People were out on the sidewalks, trying their phones, looking up and down the street for answers. That first hour felt like an overreaction the way people get antsy when the lights go out. But by 2 p.m., it was clear something bigger was happening. I ducked into a bodega on 38th to grab bottled water. Owner was sweating hard, fanning himself with a Metro card. Said his freezer had gone warm in 20 minutes. I gave him $6 and asked if he'd heard anything. Radio says grid crash, he said. Rolling failures. Queens, Manhattan, Brooklyn all out. Even parts of Jersey. He wasn't panicking yet. Neither was I. But I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. I got back on the bike and rolled south. I was headed to my apartment in Brooklyn Bed-Stuy near Kosciuszko Pool. My girl Rosa was working a shift at the food co-op on Myrtle. She'd be fine, but I wanted to get home before things got worse. The Williamsburg Bridge was a parking lot already, so I cut east, following local streets toward the Manhattan Bridge. That's when I saw the first heat stroke victim. East Broadway. Guy lying on the sidewalk near Rutgers Street, shirt soaked through, spasming. 2 women stood over him, arguing about CPR, but something was off. His limbs weren't just twitching, they were jerking, like a puppet yanked by broken strings. Then he stood, fast, too fast. His head snapped toward the nearest moving thing, a food cart guy pushing his rig across the street. The victim ran, arms low, mouth open, grabbed the cart guy and slammed him to the sidewalk. No one moved. I did. I rolled around the block and pedaled hard. I knew what I saw. That wasn't a seizure. That wasn't a guy getting better. That was something else. By the time I reached the Manhattan Bridge, crowds were gathering. No traffic, just bikes, mopeds, foot traffic, and people carrying everything from strollers to suitcases. Like an evacuation, but unofficial, uncoordinated. My battery dipped to 18%. No signal, no GPS. Still, I knew the streets. I dropped into downtown Brooklyn, cut down Flatbush, then east toward Nostrand. That's when I started noticing the sirens. Not in one place, but everywhere, like dozens of isolated emergencies. Then I saw a city bus at Fulton and Bedford with its windows smashed in. People inside were fighting. A woman was crawling out through the back emergency door, blood on her arms. She hit the pavement and didn't even stop running. I pulled off at a side street and hid behind a dumpster. Dialed Rosa. No bars. Tried again, nothing. Then I texted her, not expecting anything to go through. Blackout. People getting sick, stay inside, lock doors, I'm coming. No idea if it went through, but I had to move. Kosciuszko Pool was closed chain-link locked. Nearby, a group of teens were breaking into a corner store, pulling out warm soda and snacks. One of them looked straight at me and said, "Don't go that way." "Why?" I asked. "Guy biting people on Throop." I rode fast. Hit Myrtle Avenue like I was racing a storm. Past a Crown Fried Chicken where the front window had been cracked like a spider web. Saw a guy inside with his hands pressed to the fryer hood, convulsing. His arms twitched once, then stilled. Then he stood. I didn't wait to see what happened next. When I reached our building, the front door was open. Not broken, just ajar, swaying in the hot wind. We live on the 4th floor, walk up. 2-bedroom apartment, rent stabilized, noisy AC unit in the window or had one. With the power out, everything was quiet. "Rosa," I shouted as I hit 2nd floor. "It's me. You home?" No answer. When I got to the apartment, the door was locked. I knocked twice. Then I heard her voice. "Luis?" "Yeah." A pause, then, "Say something only you'd say." I blinked. "Smart girl," I said. "You still hide the extra hot sauce behind the cereal box so I don't use it." A moment later, the door cracked open, and Rosa pulled me in. She hugged me tight. She'd heard screaming, she said. Around noon, before her shift even ended, customers started collapsing. 2 co-workers started shaking. Another bit a guy's neck right in front of her. She ran home on foot, barely avoiding the mess around Myrtle Willoughby. She had locked the door and pulled down the blinds. Filled the bathtub. Got the candles out. Even had a flashlight and batteries from our camping gear. That night, we sat on the floor with bottles of water and cans of black beans. The city outside roared with 1,000 distant sounds, metal against metal. Voices yelling, sirens, then silence, then more sirens. At one point, sometime around 3 a.m., the building across the street lit up for a few seconds. Not electricity, it was fire. A storefront burning on the ground floor. Flames licking out from the broken window of what used to be a sneaker shop. No one put it out. No fire trucks ever came. The smoke drifted upward into the thick, heat-clogged air and settled over the block like a reminder. We were on our own. By morning, the neighborhood was changed. It wasn't just quiet, it was watching. Streets that had once felt like home, the bodegas, the tire shop, the guy who sold churros outside the subway all felt unfamiliar. The sidewalk was littered with trash, paper, broken glass, torn shirts. We spotted a delivery van that had smashed into a hydrant. Wheels still turned like it had veered at the last second. A man was lying half out of the driver's seat, unmoving. We didn't go near him. I had charged the e-bike as much as I could before the grid went down. The battery showed 43%, maybe a dozen miles of use, give or take, depending on the assist level. We had one other bike, Rosa's old single-speed Fuji, and I tuned it up with the small toolkit I kept in the closet. Brakes were good. Chain was still clean. We loaded small bags, water bottles, a first aid pouch, a flashlight, and the portable crank radio my cousin Junior gave me 2 years ago. It didn't pick up much beyond static, but we got a brief voice transmission on the NOAA band. Robotic and broken something about urban quarantine in effect, and contact emergency services only if secure. That was it. We took side streets east, away from the sirens that were still popping near Broadway. Marcy Avenue was full of abandoned cars, but no people. It was unnervingly still. The air was hot, even early, probably 90 degrees Fahrenheit already by 9 a.m., and climbing. We passed a man standing in the middle of the crosswalk, arms limp at his sides, face expressionless. I signaled Rosa to ride wide. He didn't turn. He didn't follow. Just stood there, staring at a point we couldn't see. As we moved through the quieter parts of Bedford-Stuyvesant toward Fort Greene, we began to see the patterns. The infected, and we were calling them that now, not sick, not heat stroke victims, had different behavior depending on their state. Some moved fast, erratic, in bursts. Others just stood or shambled, like they'd worn themselves out or were in some kind of waiting mode. Noise set them off. Motion set them off. But light? That didn't seem to register, at least not yet. They weren't coordinated, not hunting in groups, but they were always in the way, unpredictable and dangerous. Some had open wounds that didn't bleed the way they should. One man had a massive laceration along his scalp, dried brown, not red, like the blood had stopped circulating altogether. We stopped near a shuttered cafe off Green Avenue to check our position. The maps were still useless. No signal. GPS, if it existed at all, was buried under empty load screens. I knew the route well enough, but Junior had moved last year. He used to be off 7th Avenue near Flatbush, but now he was deeper in Park Slope, closer to Prospect Park West. We had to decide whether to skirt the park or cut across it. Either way had risk. Prospect Heights was worse. It looked like a herd had come through. Storefront windows were shattered, and someone had tried to build a barricade with scooters and trash bins across Vanderbilt Avenue. It hadn't worked. We found 4 bodies piled near the corner of Bergen Street. 2 adults, 1 kid, and an NYPD officer in full summer uniform. His sidearm was missing, but his radio was still clipped to his vest. I picked it up, turned it on. Static. Then a voice crackled in. Central Command relocated to Red Hook Terminal. Repeat, Red Hook. If any units still... Then it cut. I kept the radio. Battery was half dead, but better than nothing. We moved through the slope using back alleys and fenced yards. Twice, we had to double back to avoid infected that had started following us. They didn't move constantly, but when they locked on, they accelerated fast, not Olympic sprint fast, but like deer, twitchy, sudden, no wasted motion. Rosa called it switch flip speed. One moment, they'd be swaying on their feet, the next, they were lunging toward you with no warning, mouth open like a snake about to strike. When we reached Junior Street 11th near Prospect Park West, I knew immediately something was wrong. The front door of his building was gone, not broken in half, just gone. Inside, the stairwell was sprayed with what looked like dried vomit and blood, smeared on the walls and handrails. 3rd floor, apartment 3. D. I kicked the door twice, then opened it carefully with the crowbar raised. Empty. Signs of struggle everywhere. A broken lamp, drawers pulled out. A half-eaten sandwich still sitting on the counter. Then I saw the message written on the wall near the bathroom in thick black marker. Louis, if you see this, went to Via Clinic. Brooklyn Navy Yard, stay out of Prospect Park, they're nesting. Nesting. The word hit me in the gut. What did that mean? Were they collecting there? Gathering? We didn't wait to find out. The Navy Yard wasn't far, maybe 4 miles. But that meant getting through or around parts of downtown Brooklyn and possibly crossing through Navy Hill. It wasn't just about geography anymore, it was about avoiding noise, shadows, motion, and anything that looked like it could chase us. The roads were worse by midday, the power grid was still down, and people were starting to run out of patience. Some buildings had been broken into for water alone. We passed a Duane Reade where people were hauling cases of Aquafina and batteries out in shopping carts. Nobody was looting TVs or high-ticket stuff, just essentials. That's how we knew it was serious. Near Flatbush and DeKalb, we saw the first military vehicle, a tan Humvee parked at an angle, rear door open. No one inside. The two soldiers who'd once manned it were lying in the shade of a pharmacy awning, unmoving. We didn't go closer. One of them twitched slightly when we passed, just enough to make us keep moving. The city was becoming vertical, that's what I kept thinking. Ground level was chaos, blocked, watched, broken. But above? The fire escapes, the rooftops, the terraces, that was where people were trying to survive now. We saw a woman lowering a bucket from the 4th floor of a brownstone, trying to pull up supplies someone on the street had left for her. She looked down at us but didn't speak. Nobody did anymore. Words meant attention. Noise meant risk. We moved fast past the Barclays Center where a line of burned-out cars had been pushed into a haphazard wall. Someone had made a checkpoint there at some point, folding tables, folding chairs, those portable metal barricades cops used during parades, but it had been overrun. Blood soaked the sidewalk, and a bicycle helmet with a cracked face shield lay discarded in the crosswalk. We kept pushing toward the Navy Yard. My legs were burning. The e-bike's battery dipped under 20%. We didn't know if Junior was even still alive, but it was the only thread we had left. And then, just after passing under the BQE near Flushing Avenue, we saw movement ahead, not erratic, not stumbling, organized. 3 people, armed, holding position near the entrance to the VA clinic just outside the yard perimeter. One of them waved, but not casually. It was a military-style hand signal. Palm open, held still, then a small beckon. I dropped my hands and stopped the bike. Rosa followed suit. We raised our arms. Slowly. No sudden moves. "Civilian?" the woman with the signal asked. She wore a medic patch on her arm. Her voice was calm but sharp. "Yeah," I said. "Looking for Junior Rivera, EMT, said he came here." She nodded, looked at one of the others. He checked a clipboard. "Rivera. Came in last night, injured, stable. We're screening everyone for exposure. If you want in, we scan first. Any bite, you're out. Understand?" We nodded. Rosa and I stepped forward. We were about to cross into the Navy Yard, maybe the last functioning zone in a city spiraling into collapse, but I couldn't shake the feeling, the heavy pressure in my gut, that what we had seen so far was just the beginning. The soldiers at the gate weren't regular NYPD. I knew enough about uniforms to spot the difference. These were National Guard fatigues, stained dark with sweat, sleeves rolled up, but they still carried themselves like people trying to maintain order. One of them had a caduceus patch, a medic. She motioned us forward toward a folding table inside a barricade made from concrete traffic dividers and sandbags. The gate itself was a chain-link fence reinforced with cargo pallets and zip ties. It looked slapped together, desperate, temporary, like it wasn't meant to hold long. They scanned us with a handheld infrared thermometer, first not for the virus, but for fever. Anything over 101 degrees Fahrenheit, and you got turned back, no discussion. Then a visual inspection. Eyes, mouth, limbs. Any sign of bites or open wounds and you were denied entry. Rosa passed first, then me. My heart was hammering the entire time. Not from fear of infection, I was fairly certain we hadn't been touched, but from knowing that, for all their precautions, this wasn't security. It was triage. They weren't protecting the people inside from the threat. They were buying time until someone with better equipment could step in. Inside the Navy Yard, things were tense but organized. They had cordoned off Building 92, the one near the Sands Street gate, and turned it into a temporary clinic. It wasn't running like a hospital, not exactly, more like a field triage center. There were IV bags hanging from improvised hooks, cots arranged in rows under flood lamps powered by a diesel generator, and a sharp chemical tang in the air from disinfectant and sweat. The generator noise filled the space with a low vibrating hum that masked the outside world just enough to make it feel surreal. We were issued wristbands, red for cleared but not permanent, yellow for reassessment pending. I noticed that no one had green. The implication was clear. There was no safe status anymore. Junior was in the far corner under a hanging LED work light, arm in a sling, shirt torn open at the shoulder. A nasty gash ran along his upper arm, stapled shut in 3 places and crusted with iodine. When he saw us, he actually smiled a tired, weighty grin like a man who'd forgotten he still had family. He waved with his good hand, and I felt my chest loosen for the first time in days. "You made it," he said as I knelt beside him. "Thought you'd hole up with your mom." I shook my head. "She's across the bridge. Haven't heard anything since the first night. Cell towers are down. We came looking for you first." He nodded slowly, then winced. "Got clipped during a rescue near Myrtle. Guy bit through someone's forearm like it was a drumstick. We pulled the victim, but the rest of the team didn't make it. That's when command started falling back to here." I glanced around the room. Most of the people inside weren't military. Locals, mostly. Workers from the warehouses, a couple of delivery drivers, some janitors, a maintenance tech still wearing his Con Edison badge. Everyone looked dehydrated, sleep-deprived. A lot of them were injured not from bites, but from falls, broken glass, blunt trauma. Brooklyn hadn't just fallen apart, it had collapsed on top of itself. One of the sergeants gathered people in the hallway around 18 o'clock hours and briefed us. The blackout, he explained, had triggered cascading failures in the emergency response systems. Hospitals lost backup power when fuel ran out. EMT dispatch broke down by day 2. And then the patients, he never used the word infected, started turning violent in numbers too large to manage. By day 3, full districts were lost. They weren't sending in help, not yet. New York was being treated as an uncontrolled zone. That phrase stuck in my head like a nail. We weren't being evacuated. We were being quarantined. There was an uneasy calm inside the yard that night. The perimeter was guarded, the floodlights stayed on, and meals were rationed MREs and bottled water. It was the first real food Rosa and I had eaten since the blackout. But nobody slept deeply. You could tell. The air felt like it might shatter. We took turns resting near Junior's cot, Rosa curled up under a tarp, me on the concrete floor with my backpack as a pillow. Outside the building, something howled around 2 a.m. long, low, not quite human. Every light in the yard stayed on after that. By morning, the National Guard had a new problem. More survivors were showing up, dozens of them. Some on foot, others wheeled in on makeshift stretchers. But some were compromised. An older man had collapsed just outside the fence after making it all the way from Crown Heights. When the medics tried to help, he convulsed, vomited a thick black fluid, and stopped breathing. Within minutes, he reanimated, not slowly, not with confusion like the first wave. This one came back like he knew where he was. He lunged for a guard and bit through his neck before being shot 3 times in the chest. That incident changed everything. The protocols tightened. No new entries without a full blood test. The word mutation started to float around among the staff. Junior overheard it from one of the medics. The virus wasn't static, It was adjusting, adapting, maybe even learning. The ones we'd seen earlier, the slow, twitchy infected, they might have been early stage. These new ones were something else. Around noon, Rosa and I volunteered to join a recon team. It wasn't out of heroism. The truth was, we were afraid the yard would be overrun, and I needed to know what was happening in Manhattan, where my mother lived. I told myself we could come back, that we'd return before nightfall, but I already knew things weren't going to be that easy. The recon team was a mix of guardsmen and locals like us. A construction worker named Marco carried a sledgehammer and wore a fluorescent vest over body armor. Another woman, Leah, had been NYPD before the blackout. She still had her badge clipped to her belt, along with a Glock and extra magazines in a homemade chest rig. We were issued radios, packs with water and med kits, and a laminated street map with a bold red X marked at the Manhattan Bridge entrance. The plan was to scout the approaches, see if any crossings were still usable, see if the bridge was packed, or if any of the infected were clustering there. One of the techs said the last drone footage they received before satellite uplink went dark showed heavy movement on the bridge around day 3. After that, nothing. We left the Navy Yard around 14:15, moving in a tight column through the desolate streets. Brooklyn was quieter now, not safer, just emptier. The infected weren't gone. We passed several wandering between parked cars or staggering through alleys, but they weren't moving with the same blind frenzy. They were slow again, watching as if waiting for something. We kept to the shadows and crossed under the Manhattan Bridge viaduct on J Street. That's when we found the barricade. Someone had tried to block the bridge with a dump truck, and a bus turned sideways. It didn't work. The barriers had been pushed back not by machines, but by hands. You could see the blood streaks where they'd shoved. The infected were evolving in coordination. Or maybe just responding to density, crowding together in tighter groups, learning to move obstacles. Either way, it meant the virus wasn't acting on instinct alone anymore. We reached the bridge approach and climbed the pedestrian ramp halfway up. From there, we had a clear view of the span. My stomach turned. Hundreds of them. Motionless at first. Packed shoulder to shoulder, head to head. Some sat slumped on the asphalt. Others stood swaying. They weren't blocking the bridge, they were waiting on it. Like it was a nest or a feeding ground. We couldn't get any closer. Leah took a few photos with a salvaged digital camera. Then, as we turned to leave, one of them looked up a woman in a blood-smeared office dress, eyes pale and clouded, mouth slack. She didn't chase, she didn't scream. She just stared. We backed away slowly. She watched the whole time. By the time we returned to the Navy Yard, the sun was dipping below the skyline, casting shadows long and strange across the pavement. The perimeter lights flickered on again. The diesel generator hummed. But I could feel the temperature rising, not the air, but the atmosphere. The tension. The sense that something was closing in. Inside the main hall, the medic who'd first checked us in pulled me aside. She said they'd decoded part of a broadcast from the CDC. Atlanta had gone dark. Boston was non-responsive. No new transmissions from Philadelphia. The outbreak wasn't just in New York. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. I just nodded, thanked her, and sat on the edge of an overturned crate near Junior, who was half dozing with a fresh dressing over his wound. Rosa was fiddling with a radio she'd found in one of the equipment bins, trying to tune it to anything above static. But the only noise coming through was a broken loop of the same National Emergency Alert System tone, occasionally interrupted by garbled fragments, "Stay in your homes," or "Martial law now in effect," followed by distortion that sounded like shouting, maybe gunfire, hard to tell. We were boxed in. Not just in Brooklyn, not just in the Navy Yard. The whole region, maybe the whole East Coast, was collapsing under the weight of something we didn't understand. The blackout had simply peeled the first layer of stability away like a scab. Underneath, the infection spread faster than any of the models could have predicted. Without power, communication, or functional leadership, the virus hadn't just moved, it had detonated. A pressure wave of chaos rippling from city to city. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced between the corridors of the building we were quartered in, listening to the faint buzzing of sodium lamps and the intermittent crackle of radios as the guard rotated shifts. One of them, a reservist named Doyle, let me stand with him on the south perimeter. We didn't speak much, just stood there watching the skyline beyond the Navy Yard's fencing. The Manhattan Bridge was barely visible now, swallowed by the murky night, but the infected were still there. I could feel them more than see them. A thick, suffocating presence. Around 3 a.m., a flare went up over Williamsburg. Red-orange streak, silent at first, then followed by the distant pop of gunfire. Doyle leaned forward, squinting. "Too far for a perimeter breach," he muttered, "but close enough to matter." I asked him what he meant. He just looked at me and said, "Collapse radius." Apparently, that was the term their CO had started using. Collapse radius. The theoretical zone around any refuge where control could no longer be guaranteed. It expanded with each breach, with each failed evacuation, with every person who tried to flee and instead brought the infection with them. Like a ripple in a pond, only the pond was the entire urban grid, and the ripple was thick with blood and screaming. The next morning, we were briefed again. The commanders had decided the Navy Yard wasn't going to hold. Supplies were finite. Fuel was running out. No new orders had come through in over 48 hours. They had confirmation that Fort Hamilton had been compromised. Red Hook was completely lost. And on the upper end of Manhattan, satellite images, old ones, from before the blackout, showed signs of mass movement around Columbia and Harlem. Now, nothing came from those areas. Just silence. We had one shot to get out. The plan was risky, borderline suicidal. A convoy was being organized. 3 military trucks and a fuel tanker that had been recovered from a depot near Atlantic Avenue. It would leave at dusk and head east toward Long Island, using the I-278 route through Queens. The idea was to make it to the airfield at Farmingdale. Word was a small National Guard detachment had fortified Republic Airport and were still operating out of a hangar. If they could be reached, there might still be a path out of the city, via airlift if the fuel held. Only about 40 of us would be able to go. The rest, injured, elderly, those with infected wounds, would remain behind with a skeleton crew to protect them as long as possible. Junior was one of them. His arm wasn't healing right and his breathing was shallow now. Infection, maybe not the virus, but something bad. He didn't argue when I told him we had to go. He just gave me a long, quiet look, then pulled a small folding knife from his pack and handed it to me. It was a cheap utility blade, the kind bike messengers carry. I'd seen him cut more tires and packages with it than I could count, but now it felt like something final. "You keep her safe," he said, nodding toward Rosa, "and don't stop moving." I tried to answer, but nothing came. Just a nod. I think he knew. We both did. We left just after 1930. The convoy crawled through the Navy Yard gates and swung onto Flushing Avenue, the trucks moving like steel whales through streets slick with soot and trash. I rode in the back of the second truck, wedged between cases of MREs and crates of ammo. Rosa sat across from me, staring at the open slit of window behind the tailgate as if she could memorize the city into her bones. The soldier riding shotgun up front was an engineer from Syracuse who'd only been in New York for 4 days before everything fell apart. He carried a pump-action shotgun in a backpack stuffed with spare batteries and rations. His name was Callahan. He never stopped tapping his left leg, a nervous tick. The route took us through Clinton Hill, past shuttered bodegas and piles of burned-out scooters. The damage was worse here. Windows smashed, storefronts looted, corpses in the street. Some of the bodies were clearly infected, twisted in final paroxysms of rage, faces frozen in mid-scream. Others had bullet wounds, the result of panicked firefights. Civilian-on-civilian violence we didn't stop to count. Near the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, we hit the first real blockade. A school bus turned sideways, surrounded by scorched police cruisers. The lead truck had to reverse and swing wide through a side street, bumping over a sidewalk littered with broken glass and what looked like a spilled rack of mannequins from a department store. Except one of them twitched as we passed. From there, things got tighter. The roads narrowed, hemmed in by abandoned vehicles. Cars jammed up against fire hydrants. Delivery vans crashed into poles, whole intersections choked with accidents that had never been cleared. We moved slower. At one point, a sedan fell off a rooftop parking garage 2 stories above and landed 3 feet from the rear truck. No one said anything for a full minute after that. Then Callahan just muttered, "They're starting to climb." The infected were changing again. By the time we crossed into Queens, night had fully settled in. The sky was smeared with the glow of distant fires, and a sulfuric wind blew up from the east, thick with the scent of ozone and burning plastic. We passed an overpass where someone had hung a banner from the railings. "Stay quiet or they find you." The words were spray-painted in red, dripping down like fresh blood. It wasn't wrong. Somewhere near Woodside, we lost the 3rd truck. It hit an IED or maybe just a ruptured gas main. The explosion knocked our vehicle onto 2 wheels, and the force of the blast shattered half the windows. We scrambled out, deafened and dazed, as flames lit the night behind us. No survivors from that one. The infected swarmed the fire like moths. Dozens of them, sprinting. Not staggering, not slow, sprinting. Their eyes glowed pale in the flickering light, and their limbs bent too far when they moved, like tendons had detached from bone. We didn't fight, there was no point. The convoy was now 2 trucks and a burning wreck, and we weren't going to hold off 50 of those things with half a clip each. We drove, barreled east, leaving behind what was once Elmhurst and Flushing, smashing through stop signs and sidewalks, swerving to avoid bodies that may or may not have been alive. At some point past Little Neck, the city began to thin. More trees, less concrete, houses instead of tenements. We stopped once in an overgrown parking lot behind a shuttered CVS to change a blown tire and check the engines. I remember the silence then. No gunfire, no screams, just the low hum of distant generators and the occasional creak of branches. The city was behind us now, but it had left something in us. A residue, like breathing in battery acid. By dawn, we reached the outskirts of Farmingdale. The airfield was real. The barricades were real, so were the soldiers. They scanned us again, temperature, eyes, blood samples. A drone circled above us on a solar glide path, and a man in a hazmat suit gave us all iodine tablets before letting us into the base. The base was barely holding on. One runway was cratered. Half the hangars were filled with refugees. But they had power, they had food, and most importantly, they had a single rotary-wing aircraft being refueled by hand. A CH-47 Chinook with room for about 24 people. That would be the first evac, they said. Others would follow, if the airspace stayed clear. We didn't cry. There was no energy left for crying, just the mechanical going through of steps. Decon, rationing, sleeping on a floor with strangers, every muscle locked in survival mode. I found Rosa sitting on the tarmac later that day, staring east toward the empty horizon. "Think we'll ever see Brooklyn again?" she asked. I didn't answer, because part of me still wasn't sure we'd even survive the night. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.